Thank you, Norbert, for your talk. You won't be surprised to hear that you're not the first American to come to Australia and tell us what to think. But I think you are the first, in my experience, to come with diagrams of the Southern Hemisphere and to have done research on the cities. I was worried for a while there was the old dart kept coming up, but it was Australian and it was about Sydney. So I thought, and the 2 points that you make I think are very real and they're very, very potent. But, there's always a but, from a man carrying a book. Did you notice that Maria, who's young, carries an iPad and I'm old and I carry a book? I think most of what Norbert's talking about is in fact a form of engineering, not a form of design. And I want to use that as a lever to talk about what is happening in education in Australia at the moment, because it's the young who are going to be taking a lot of interest in climate change. And you may have heard of STEM. Many people have heard of STEM being science, technology, engineering and maths, although some of my friends prefer to have it as STEAM, like coming out of your ears. So it's science, technology, engineering, arts, or architecture, and maths. I don't like either of those. I prefer DREAMS, which is design, research, engineering, architecture, maths and science. Because I think it is a collaborative thing. I think solving the city is not an engineering problem, although it is given to engineers so often. You know, and primarily in Sydney, it's been given to road engineers. You know, it's a sort of notch above child molester in my book, in terms of the damage that's been done to society. I mean, wonderful book from America. Bernard Rudofsky in the 1960s wrote Streets for People, a primer for Americans. That's its subtitle, because it was streets rather than roads. And I think that's the potent thing that's in your argument, is the fact that it is about streets with people in them rather than roads with cars. And the street pattern is the street pattern to where the housing is rather than the road pattern to how the city is orchestrated. And I think there's a very big potent difference. I just want to talk about two other things quickly, patterns and waves. I think what Norbert's searching for and showing tonight are things which are sometimes labelled as patterns. I know it's very unfashionable to talk about Christopher Alexander and the pattern language, but I still think it's one of the 10 or so foundation books to read about architecture, because it's a mathematician, a scientist, mathematician trying to codify what would make a more humane world. And if you don't know the book, I think it's absolutely worth reading. Forget the first third of it, it's all about world domination, and forget the last third, because it's all about hippie building. But the middle third is the best primer you can get. And in the middle of that is a section which talks about painting buildings white, which I think is very interesting as a pattern. And I think those patterns are incredibly important for designers, because we live in an increasingly complex world. Right. I just want to... I'll find the one on the white buildings later. I thought it was interesting because it's actually printed on very thin paper and has about the weight of a Bible. So increasingly complex things, and I think we look to pattern books, which they used to have, and we have less and less of them. We have more and more glamour books of glamour work, and less do we see the patterns behind things, which is what Norbert's trying to talk about, is the deeper patterns of things. And in the presence of my good friend Bruce Judd, I'd like to acknowledge one of my favourite pattern books is Medium Density Housing in Australia, 2 volumes. Because it gets used in our office, because it's low and close. It's a pattern book of things, Bruce, it's just fantastic. And I think we don't produce that. The Institute of Architects produce that. They don't produce that anymore. Take note, Joe Agius, wherever you are. Sorry, you're... because I think we're too interested in the glamour and we're not interested in the patterns that lie behind it. And the last thing I want to say about waves is that I think there are 3 waves. The first wave was when the hippies started talking about sustainability, but in terms of solar energy and so on, and it was about energy efficiency, the things that Norbert's talking about tonight, about making buildings more efficient so they require less power. And that was the first wave of sustainability, the 60s, 70s, 80s. The second wave of it, I think, was when large-scale power, replacement power, renewable energy power came in. Big solar farms, big wind farms, they're talking about hydropower, biomass. And they would always say that those renewable energies wouldn't work unless you reduced down the use in the building. But they were still on an old model where the wind power was remote, the solar power was off in the desert. It was a power station. The third wave, which I think is really interesting, is the big disruptive technology of actually putting the energy on the building, the zero energy building, zero carbon and so on. So I'm afraid the roofs aren't white. I wrote about 10 years ago in AR that it would be a thrill one day to fly over Sydney and instead of seeing red roofs and blue swimming pools, you saw black roofs of photovoltaics. In those 10 years, the uptake of photovoltaics in Sydney, or in Australia, but in Sydney in particular, is higher than anywhere else in the world. So we are, and you now can fly in, and there are whole sections of Sydney that you do see black roofs, but they're actually producing power that goes in to the house. The next disruptive technology is batteries, of course. The batteries that people know about are coming from the other disruptive technology. Wait until you drive an electric car that is powered from your roof. That would make, I think, an immense difference. So yes, I think white buildings, black roofs.